Okay, done. Yeah, so that's the format of the event. So before we actually kick off the proceedings, it's my duty as publisher to inform you that there are books for sale and that you might consider buying them. So the two books in question, the purpose of this event is to celebrate the publication of these two books, and the two books in question I can show you here. There's first of all, you see that? Reading Moby-Dick by Martin Stannard. This is 96 pages of poetry, and it's a very nice looking object. I can say that because Martin is entirely responsible for the design of this. I didn't have any part in that, and I think he's done a really nice job on the design. We also have Lauren Terry's collection, which is called Museum of Lost and Broken Things. It's a shorter collection, about 30 odd pages, or 30 pages. And in fact, Lauren also had a lot of input into the design of this. And I think she proved that she has a better eye for colour than I do. So they're the two collections. And let me just share my desktop again, just to show you how you might purchase them, should you consider doing so. In a second. So the books are available for sale. You can get them on the leafpresspoetry.com, and you can pay on there by PayPal or by credit card. And the books can be dispatched to any of the countries that you're all in. And they're postage free because I can use local postage rates. So there's that. If you're in the United Kingdom, you might also consider buying them from these guys. So Five Leaves Bookshop in Nottingham is an independent bookshop. They do a very good mail order service at the moment. And, like all bookshops, I suppose, in the last few months, they've had quite a tough time. So I'm sure they'd appreciate your support. So anyway, sales pitch over. Now we can continue with the poetry. Okay. Excuse me, wrestling with technology here. Okay, the first poet who is going to read is Lauren Terry. So I'm very pleased and proud to be the publisher of Lauren's first ever collection of poetry. So it's a debut collection. Lauren is a student at Nottingham Trent University, and she's just either completing or completed her doctoral thesis. And the title of the thesis is interesting because the poetry comes out of that. So I'll make sure I get the title right. So the title is Neuropsychoanalysis, Modernist Poetic Language and Material Objects. And the obvious precursor for this type of poetry is Gertrude Stein, but Lauren also studied other modernist women poets of the 20th century, including Amy Lowell, Lola Ridge and Mina Loy. And she's also very interested in the surrealist artist, the American surrealist artist, Joseph Cornell. Now, if that makes the poetry sound like it might be somewhat academic, I can assure you, as you'll find out, it's not. So it's very witty poetry. It has an immediacy about it. It has some gorgeous lines and phrases, and it has takes a kind of delight in the strangeness of everyday objects. The poet Helen Tukey said that Lauren writes about super creepy dolls, toys, Cornell boxes, and nightmarish household appliances. So I'll now pass you over to Lauren, who will read from this book. Okay, so it's all yours, Lauren.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Alan. Hello and welcome to everyone listening at home. I must say it's very strange to be reading to you all, like sat alone in my study to a screen. It's not at all how I imagined tonight, and I could almost believe that I'm reading to myself, and for the lack of other three-dimensional faces. But I guess one potential advantage of a virtual reading, of course, is that if you really don't like one of the poems, you can just mute the poet. I'm hoping that no one will feel the need to do that tonight. You never know. So with that, I'll get right into this brief guided tour of my Museum of Lost and Broken Things. So my first poem is all about the strange capacity of the human brain to anticipate the other side of objects. So to learn and remember the arbitrary connections between shapes, colours, functions and things. And this is a poem about what happens when the other side of the object is not at all what we imagined. So when the human brain's capacity to anticipate the other side of the object is rendered obsolete. And it's called The Other Side of the Apple. Imagine the other face is flat or blue. In a bowl of other fruits with various other names, split the apple clean in half. And in the ovary there are pits for such pits, on the hot wet mound of your tongue. Things resemble apples, pregnant apples in form or colour. On the other face, is there a knife in its back? Is there a tooth or botfly feasting, shrunken head or abstract flatness? God, do not touch it. Imagine God as an apple. Do not bash it. Spit God into the palm of your right hand and let it drop, lunar ball. The fall might kill it, spill its pips. The push would make it flat on its other face. So the next poem is a piece of ekphrasis titled after a work by the modernist assemblage artist Joseph Cornell, who I write about an awful lot. And Cornell would famously search bookstores and antique shops for curios and paper ephemera for his art. And he would create these little fantasy worlds of objects in wooden boxes. And this particular poem is titled after a small round box containing thimbles, pins, mirrors, painted sawdust, and glass marbles. And it's called Beehive Thimble Forest. Shrink your eye to match the aperture of a pinhole and tally pitted tankers snagged on pylons, lurching over badlands, where planets rove in circles in the cambered pit of a mirrored drum. Hold your tongue, and the pylons reverberate, the silver whine of a carillon bell slicing ad infinitum through the blankness. So throughout Museum of Lost and Broken Things, there's a sequence of incredibly short poems named catalogue items. And these catalogue items kind of give voice to the little things that are left unnamed, unfinished, or unwanted, kind of stored in dusty attics or cupboards, kind of waiting to tell their stories. And I won't introduce them all throughout this reading, but they will all begin with catalogue items, so you'll kind of know what to expect. So catalogue item 137. Chain of paper clips, red, orange, pink, and blue. The pattern loops. So now we move kind of swiftly on to cubism of all things. And cubism is kind of all about synthesizing multiple perspectives of a particular object into one fragmented, grotesque, or abstract picture. The cubist portrait kind of does away with the object as we know it, with the illusion of depth, situating all angles of that particular object on one two-dimensional plane. So it's often quite non-linear, non-representational, or kind of flattened lines in harsh geometric shapes. And the next two poems were kind of an exercise in formulating what these cubist techniques in painting might begin to look like in language or in poetry. And the first of which is the very first poem in the collection, and it's called The Sleeping Woman is a Cubist Portrait. Semblance shell or unlit table lamp, shade nodding. She has come apart, a soiled dinner plate, shattered, stinking, spilling geometric shapes from the bed's single frame. Her members are pure assemblage, rivet, tongue, and cane. A plastic butter knife detaches, reattaches itself at an obscene angle. One pinion limp beneath the sheets, the other hailing the thing beyond the ceiling. And the second poem is Cubist Portrait of a Three-Faced Doll. When it shrieks, the head spins right round to match a face to keening, Baby is a simple oscillation of sleep and mirth, and oh, the weeping. Pity the pretty little thing, which cannot match name to thing, to 3 mouths, 6 eyes, and 4 good for seeing baby, which does not know its face from a thing in the mirror. And baby's head spins right round to match a face. To gurgling baby is a pretty monstrous little thing, with joins around the edges where baby comes apart. The skull is a soft white thing, and baby does not like it when you shake. Its head gets caught between sleep and mirth and babbling imperfect symmetry. Its bulging head, 6 eyes, a button nose for every pair. The thing a mother should not love, and when it bawls, the head spins right round to match a face. To name an oscillation is a pretty monstrous thing. So the next poem that I'm going to read is actually a true story, much to the horror of my dad, who I think is listening tonight. So my dad had made himself a lovely breakfast and set out his silverware, his plate, in such a manner that he always does. And anyone who knows my dad knows that he takes the ceremony of a meal extremely seriously. And this poem follows the series of unfortunate events that took place, and it's called Soft-Boiled Egg. With the silver comes a splitting. White yawning flaps begin to spit their yellow pus. Nestled at the core, a grey and steaming thing is sheathed in porous film, unblinking, achromatic eyes. And the next poem is for all of the houses that I've ever lived in kind of throughout my whole life. I've moved quite a lot, more than the average person, I would say. And this is a poem about the things which kind of haunt those different houses. And it's called Dream House. Where tacky carpets pluck the shoes from your feet, she slams the door so hard the knob falls off. Where black mold eats orange matte emulsion, wipe it down with foggy water, grey dishcloth in a pail. Watch shadows move between the rooms, where sheets make ghosts of cabinets. Slice the line of tape to let things breathe, and do not use her flannel for fear of smelling lavender. Where cling film wraps the body of the tub, an uncapped drain dribbles yellow, and squirrels gnaw wires in the crawl space. She keeps the house awake at night, chattering cardboard, chipboard, cupboard, clipboard. Paint your name beside others, beneath the wallpaper. Watch hot breath leave her body, and know that in this cavity, there was once a wall. And the next one will be a catalogue item. Catalogue item 24. Bear with glass eyes, cataracts are a sure sign of age. So I was recently in New Haven. I was looking through Yale's collection of Mina Loy and Gertrude Stein manuscripts for my thesis, but I happened to visit the Yale Peabody Museum of Natural History while I was there on a rare kind of afternoon away from the archives. And I've been to a lot of museums in my time, as you'll probably gather, but I've never seen any exhibit taxidermy birds in such a beautifully horrible way. And this poem is all about what I saw, and it's called The Eyeless Birds. Lithe-winged bodies snagged on the silver head of a pin. They flee from death at obscene angles, do not remember the motion of flight, belly up, hind limbs cinched in sisal twine. Scissor-beaked and dried like pitted fruit, the eye is a black pip, hole plugged with cotton wool, because children should not think of death in cabinets, pointing at the nothing on the other side of the glass. So my uncle, he's retired now, but he was once the sole caretaker of the Bernard Matthews turkey farm in Norfolk. He lived on site intended to the birds. And one summer, I visited that farm as a child with my parents. And let's just say it's a visit that I will never forget. And this one is called Tramping the Sods with Uncle Melly. 3 metal shacks piled on a yellow mound, silent and hulking. You stand on tiptoes, poke your fingers through the slats, push your nose against wet sheets and gape. Uncle Melly jabs one with his stick, makes the whole thing judder. He will not let you close enough to pet their bald red heads or ask them how they lost their tongues. Catalogue item 1. Unfinished bird box, no roof, no windows, no door. So my final poem of this evening is another of my many Joseph Cornell ones, titled after a rather kind of haunting shadow box containing a porcelain doll named Marie, and she's kind of dressed in this awful looking dress and a kind of straw hat, and she peers out from behind this knot of twigs, and it's a very strange thing to look at. And this is kind of my telling of Marie's story, and how she came to be in that box. Baby Marie. When Marie's dress turns the sour yellow of bad milk, I take her out to the thicket at the tree. Because Marie's head goes around and around, she wears her collar high to hide the deep black slit where her swan's neck and pretty head should meet. When night falls, Marie taps at my window, begging to come home, but the grinding of her joints keeps me up, and I pull Marie's arms from their sockets to put them in a box, should she ever need them again. Marie's eyes are black craters in a full moon, and she is gone by morning. Because she is not sorry, I lop Marie's hair with scissors, and when she weeps, I kiss her little nose, poke flowers through her straw hat. I bury Marie, face down in the thicket at the foot of our apple tree. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll now pass over to Alan and Martin.
Hi there. Thank you, Lauren. That was great. This is actually the first time that I've heard Lauren read her poetry, actually. So having read it a lot over the last 2 months, it's really good to hear it spoken. So terrific. Thank you, Lauren. And just to remind you, if you have any questions for Lauren, then you can ask questions at the end during the Q&A session. Okay. So what I'd normally do at this point is we would have a break. We'd all have a top of our drinks and you'd socialise with people, etc. But it's obviously a little more difficult to do that on one of these virtual events. So you kind of have to imagine that you've done that. You've had your glass of wine and you've chatted to people, and now we're ready to resume again. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is introduce the next poet to read, who is Martin Stannard. So I've known Martin for many years, and I've known his poetry for even longer. Martin has published more than 20 collections of poetry, the first one in, I think, 1983. He's collaborated with other poets like the American Mark Halliday, for example, and he's collaborated with visual artists like most notably the printmaker Dale Devereux Barker. For many years, Martin was the editor of Joe Soap's Canoe, the poetry magazine, which, being a print magazine from the 70s and 80s, has now attained a kind of legendary status, but was an important magazine in its time. In my opinion, Martin Stannard is unique in British poetry because I can't think of another poet who writes quite like he does. His nearest affiliations are with contemporary American poets, people like Charles North and Ron Padgett, and their New York School predecessors, people like Paul Violi and Kenneth Koch. So I'm just going to read the publisher's blurb that I wrote for this new collection as a way of introduction to Martin's reading. These poems are funny and profound, witty and emotional in a rare mix made possible by Martin Stannard's skill with the nuance and complexities of language. The poet engages with Herman Melville, various Chinese poets and their mistranslators, the American mystic Thomas Merton and others, in poetry that fuses an acerbic British sensibility with the verve and humour of the New York School. So I'll now hand you over to Martin to read from this book. So it's all yours, Martin.
Okay, Alan, thank you very much. And hello everyone. Welcome to my kitchen. The first thing I'm going to read is called From What Matters. There are 3 or 4 pieces in this book, actually, where the title begins with the word from, as if to suggest that I've written much more and there's more where this came from, but actually it's not true. This is all there is. So this is From What Matters, and it's I think it's a prose poem and a list poem all in one, but I'm not very good with labels, so we'll see. Matter number 29. People have taken to sitting alone like the sun. It's all right to sit alone like the sun, but not all the time. Matter 35. That which cannot be perceived through the thickest of veils shall be deemed not to exist. Matter number 48. It has come to our attention that on occasion a songstress has outdone the fiddle and piped a note so thin that even a bird's throat has been incapable of uttering it. The songstress is being sought. Matter 138. Debate as to whether the soul should contain iron or stone is ongoing. The current position is that iron is better than stone, but stone is acceptable. Matter 144. Some people still rise with the sun and set with the rising of the moon, and others do otherwise. The review continues as papers flutter from desk to floor at the slightest nudge of a through draft. Matter number 188. It remains unfortunate to be a grey-haired man sent no longer visits. Matter number 189. It remains fortunate to be a grey-haired woman, desirability long since abandoned, but whose housekeeping skills remain undimmed. Matter number 192. Maternity/paternity vouchers are no longer redeemable, and as the eagle soars beyond the mountains, so shall the fates draw their blueprint for our future upon the ocean floor. Matter 201. The hunting of imaginary bears is permitted only between March and May, and people should hunt in pairs. No further advices on this matter will be given. Matter number 240. Car parking is not permitted anywhere. Keep moving. Consider returning to the horse. That's what the signs say. Read the signs. Matter 274. Someone carried off the stopper of the ink bottle in the main office. It is forbidden to carry off the stopper of the ink bottle in the main office. Matter number 286. Scholars have established that in its youth, the ocean used to wander between slabs of land and is now gradually being sucked up into the sky by science to become rain. School textbooks will be amended accordingly. Matter 287. It follows that rivers represent the childhood of the ocean. School textbooks will be amended accordingly. Matter number 300. The recurring matter of the absence of common sense will no longer be considered owing to time constraints. All inquiries should be made to the administrative office. Matter number 301. The administrative office is no longer located where it used to be, and its email account has been deleted. Matter number 302. As part of the Back to Nature initiative, information technology matters will in future be dealt with by the farmyard animals. Matter number 303. Struck from record. Matter number 444. Challenges to the belief that duty is sacred and one may not be dumb in the presence of the law have been acknowledged and dismissed. Matter number 527. The following items are forthwith subject to a 0.5% pleasure tax: handcuffs, pipe cleaners, silk kerchiefs, playing cards, raisins, whips, herrings, instruments for polishing dull things, books about the planets, and gym slips. Matter number 531. There is always a beautiful day guaranteed if one cares for a pet. Matter number 532. All pets must be registered with the Pet Authority. Registration fees apply. Matter 572. Societal stasis is confirmed as subject to appropriate adjustments. Matter 599. The intricate mechanisms of government are already sufficiently complicated, yet it may become necessary they be rendered more so. And finally, matter number 617. The matter of the treatment of women will be dealt with separately as stipulated in Article 396, open brackets, 12/1897, close brackets, of our terms and conditions. So the next poem is called That Thing. And I have nothing to say about it because I'm not really very good at introducing my poems. This is called That Thing. We once had one in our house with handles on both sides, but I forget its name. Sometimes I even forget my own. The self is an overlaying of multiple identities comprised not just of what is remembered and forgotten, but of how one is located in the wider questions of belonging, memory, and solidarity. At least, that's what was on my mind as I lit a bonfire in the kitchen, which is where I was located. It's a mystery as to what that lump is, but the chances are it's nothing to be concerned about. There are better reasons to lay awake at night, worrying yourself sick. I am from here, I thought, and recognized the pots and pans, and how, if one polishes them enough, they shine like brilliant household suns. I think I may go and live in a shed when all this is over. In the last 20 years, average house prices have grown about 7 times faster than average income. That's on my mind as I write this, and watch the fire brigade go about their business with consummate professionalism and gusto. It occurred to me also that Galileo said, nature's great book is written in mathematical symbols, although I think he said it in Italian, and it's not really relevant. It's interesting what crosses one's mind as the events of the day occur, watched by miserable youths and unquiet presences who, with nothing to do but act as reminders of what has been lost, refuse to stay home and instead nibble away at the edges of what would otherwise be a perfectly acceptable existence. Here comes another little person trying to attract my attention. Take my hat, please. You'll see it's not been keeping much warm at all. Those are shadows taking shape before my very eyes, and that's a horror show over there. And those little horror shows gathered round them will, I guess, be their children. How awful. The boys and girls I've known, the workmen and the labourers on the estate, they're in the past now, of course, but they are still kind of present, although I don't know their names, never did. And when old Chivers choked on a chicken leg, everyone thought it was a joke until it was too late. That was a learning experience for all of us, and is on my mind as I write this. The burning issues of the day are ablaze with themselves, but grow tiresome. To be a fireman is apparently the career of choice among an increasing number of university graduates, and is a sign of the times. Yes, thank you. I will have another one of those canapés. They're delicious, even if they're not homemade. And thank you for reading this. You've made my life better, briefly. Okay, I'm going to turn to some prose now, if I can find the right page. This is something called What I Did and How I Did It. It's actually a series of 12 paragraphs. Each paragraph is titled. I'm not going to read them all because otherwise we'd be here all night. So I'm just going to read a couple of them. As I say, the main title is What I Did and How I Did It. And the first one I'm going to read is the first paragraph, which is called How I Coped with Living Among Morons. The day I attained adulthood, I heard the flapping of wings, and a dark hawk alighted upon my left shoulder and whispered in my ear about how I ought to go my own way And although I should make it a show of liking people, I had to remember it was just a show and to hold on to my true and inner self. It was something like that. I don't remember the exact words because I was a bit distracted by having a dark hawk on my shoulder. Anyway, I took the advice and I would reckon the success rate at 60-40 or 40-60, thus rendering the title of this paragraph questionable, whichever way you look at it. This is number 7. Yeah, I'm going to read this one. I get a bit emotional with this one. Try not to well up when I read it. It's called How I Lost My Wife. We were holidaying on a canal boat when we were boarded by a band of pirates who ransacked our things and were more than complimentary about my wife's attractions. I was too frightened to think about disagreeing. They made me walk the plank, but as we were then navigating a very narrow stretch of the waterway, I was able to step off the end of the plank onto the towpath and leg it away as fast as I could. I did not look back. I reported the outrage to the police, who remarked that piracy seemed to be on the increase. I have not seen my wife since that day. I hope she's all right. And this is the last one of these. It's how I forgot where my family lived. I had not seen Mum and Dad for quite a long time because I thought that when you fled the nest, it was perfectly all right not to go back very often, except to pick up the occasional birthday or Christmas gift. I figured I was in very heavy arrears on the gift account and must be owed quite a lot. So I took a coach and travelled across the several hundred miles of Middle English wilderness to pay a surprise call, Mum in particular being very fond of surprises if they did not involve anything illegal or spiritually and or morally disturbing. It was only when a complete stranger answered the door of the house in which I had grown up, I remembered that some time ago, my parents had mentioned something about moving. Some people say I'm too wrapped up in my own affairs to think about anyone or anything else, and use occasions like this to make their point. Some of you will know that last year, Shoestring Press, Nottingham-based Shoestring Press, published a collection of poems, translations, versions of Chinese Tang Dynasty poetry, which I had worked on. And when I was working on those poems, and I'm still working on them these days, but when I work on the Chinese translations versions, I look online to see other translations just to kind of get my bearing. And in the course of doing that, one comes across some interesting things. And I'm going to read something from highlights from the Art of Translation. And these highlights from the Art of Translation are lines that I found online. And they were translations, they were from translations of Chinese poems into what the translators evidently thought was English. And what I've done is taken the liberty of stealing some of the lines from here and there and organizing them into what seem to be poems, even though they are not really. And I will say in addition that I've not changed any words here. All I've done is just kind of taken lines and put them together. In the course of doing this, also, I learned half a dozen new English words I just didn't know existed. Had to look them up to make sure they were real. I'm going to read wayfaring wild geese. There's a word in here which I never knew, which is devoir, or devoirs in the plural, which I understand to mean duty or obligation. Anyway, this is wayfaring wild geese. Wayfaring wild geese files seem like a sewn array. I deplore being caught in the jitters on the beach of jitters, and stranded in desperate straits in the desperate straits. Totally unsettled by my doles and bogged down by official devoirs, if I've not been excruciated by the torture of the asunder disposal, I believe anyone would have his hair turned hoar under this sorrow. My chained melancholy is really unbreakable, No one is as habdab stricken as myself. This is called Whence the Dingles. Whence the Well, actually, there's a word in here which is a tricky word, and I'll try not to mispronounce it. It's cunctated. And if anybody out there knows what cunctated means, well done. Whence the dingles of a donned sword fade out with the recoil. On this night of rain we tattle under the protracted deluge. The woods and fields are to a desolate destitute abraded. Even cooking becomes difficult and cunctated. Just pining for lovesick is inutile. I'd rather my dismals turn into hysteroid, but by chance I'll run into a gaffer rural, and in a pleasant discourse will engage and forget to truce. And the last one of these I'm going to read is Whence for the Mizzly Vista. Mizzly means drizzly, kind of like rain. Whence for the mizzly vista, who'd be my vire? All these years I've either fallen in the dumps or been ailing, so to get over my long disgruntles and relish the sparkling vernal glamour is at odds with carpe diem of joie de vivre. I'd like to wear a blossom on my head, but there is no one at my disposal. I'd also like to revel in a booze, but have no boon fellows. Nobody will care even if I am sozzled. Who will come visit this man in the dumps today when he is over a barrel? Okay, and I'm going to finish with the title poem, or some of the title poem, reading Moby-Dick or the Whale. It's quite a long poem. It takes up half a dozen pages. So again, I'm not going to read all of it. But a word of introduction about it. It's a poem that is a narrative of a kind of a marathon readathon. A readathon that involves reading Moby-Dick over the course of 2 or 3 days, which I have to say, I certainly have not done. It takes a bit longer than that. The poem begins at the beginning of chapter 1 of the book with a corny play on Call Me Ishmael, and then proceeds through the book, and it takes Melville's words and my own words and blends them together, and well, basically that's what it is. And I'm going to read the first section, the last section, and a little bit in the middle. So this is reading Moby-Dick all the way. Call me optimistic. I began reading at 7:55 of the AM, and by 8:05 I knew that meditation and water are wedded forever, and the next few days were to be long. They loomed not like a snow hill in the air, but like something lengthy that begins at the beginning and will not end until you begin to wonder about your old age and how it might be endured. I stuffed a quick breakfast into my stomach bag, scraped metaphorical ice from my frosted eyes, and at 8:20 was in the Spouter Inn. By 8:30 I was abed with a man, and although I have never been abed with a man before, I have to say I've never slept better in my life. Upon waking, page 28 was arrived, and I was looking forward to 29. I calculated that at least 3 or 4 hours must elapse before I could resume what passes for my ordinary life, and I was wondering what might be being cooked up. Life in the street goes on without me, but on the starboard hand of every woe, there is a sure delight. By 9:30 I was in New Bedford, a place all beach and no background. And what is background other than something to loaf and loiter in front of? During the morning, I travelled religion and witnessed memorials, reaching Nantucket in time for 11s. I had soup. By lunchtime, I was down to the ship, and my future had been told. It held the afternoon and further reading. Note to self, visit optician as soon as possible. I think I need new spectacles. Note to you, note how I use the word spectacles there instead of glasses. And though I am mainly a stay-at-home, in my mind I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts, and the irony of that is self-evident. Christmas came, but was soon gone. It will never be the same again, nor will anything. And this is part 7, which is near the end. 7. It being calm weather, I have neglected to mention the time of year. It is the rainy season here. It's been raining, but now it's not. This may be information you were craving in the information age. And with a wild whimsiness and a not wild exclamation, availing myself of the mild summer cool air that now reigns, and in preparation for the final 100 or so pages of this journey, I need to go do some shopping, or I shall starve and my family along with me. What time is it? I don't know. I've lost track, for, like the ocean, life has no discernible paths for we little men, though for the Leviathan they are as clear as highways. Whatever, east and west, by early sunrise and by fall of eve, with matted beard, I can be so uncouth. I penetrate further and farther and even beyond the heart of this. Learn something. Not seldom in this life shall we be soothed and soothed again, but soothed only to a certain point. And this is the final section. Next morning, I pick up where I left off, over coffee and toast and alone at home in an enchanted silence but for the tumult without. I'm planning a day dedicated to reaching the end of all that is and all that might be, steering or being steered, and all progress now determined by ruthlessly ignoring everything else. There seems to be a strange calm within that I trust does not preclude some desperate scene. Some worlds must remain unknown, and unknown worlds might empty into me, but that's what I bought a ticket for. As if to distract me, Rachel calls my cell several times until I turn it off. She may be weeping for her children or just wanting a chat, but I don't care either way. And now, at this time and place, after so long and wide a cruise by night and day, delight awaits to meet me. A symphony on the final day, a day clear and steel blue. The old man steps forth, thrusts out his face, snuffs up the air, and sees, or perhaps not sees, but senses, a gentle joyousness awaiting. But it is often the case that when the day is nearly done, all I am able to consider is what was not done, or, if done, done but poorly. Today dawned fair and fresh, and a fairer day could not have dawned, but now, at 11 in the forenoon, the room is darkening, rain clouds fill the sky, and page 624 has arrived. You would expect there to be more to say, but all my words are spent. The drama's done. We are finished. And I'm finished. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Martin. I think a round of applause is called for. Or at least congratulations. So that was terrific reading. Thank you to both poets for that reading. Poetry audiences at poetry readings are often quiet, but on webinars like this, they're completely silent, which is a bit weird. But if you look in the chat, there are all messages, which kind of helps. So yeah, that was a great reading, and by both poets. So what I'd like to do now, after all the virtual applause, is to move towards the last part of the event, which is question and answer. I'm sure that after the last few months, you're all very familiar with Zoom, but just in case you're not, if you look at the menu at the bottom of your Zoom application, you'll see there's a Q&A box, and you can put questions in there, and those questions can then be answered. And there's also an option to dismiss them, which could be quite handy. But I know that we have a very erudite audience in attendance, so I'm sure you can think of some good questions. While you're doing that, I have thought of a couple of questions myself, so I'll kick things off. I have one question for Lauren and one for Martin. So yeah, Lauren, just like to ask you first of all. Well, I've got a couple. I'll ask the first one. In the layout of the poems in your book, some of them are laid out as prose with kind of justified text, and others are laid out as conventional poetry. Do you see a difference between the two, or do you use the prose layout for any particular effect? And what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks for that question, Alan. Yeah, one of my favorite things about poetry is the ability to experiment with those different layouts on the page. And I love I see the page as a kind of puzzle. So once you've got the raw text, you can kind of mess around with what's going on. And it obviously greatly impacts the way that the reader is going to take in that poem. But in reference to the prose poems, they are kind of my formulation of that cubist technique that I was talking about earlier on. So with those ones, I kind of wanted all of the sentences to run on and so that the language really becomes kind of multifaceted. So there are many meanings and many sentences within the sentence. And yeah, that's just something that I find kind of exciting about poetry. And I guess that's why I write poems. It's to kind of experiment with all of those weird and wonderful things. And it's very much kind of from my modernist roots, because they were mad into those types of things too. I think you're still muted, Alan.
Yeah, I did reply. Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. Yeah, and I do have another question, which is, I was wondering really whether this is a short collection and it's very kind of themed. I was wondering whether if you were to write a longer collection, whether you would continue that theme of material objects and modernist language, or whether you'd branch into other themes, and if so, what? And also wondered if you had more work in the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the pamphlet, well, the poems in the pamphlet are all part of my thesis. So I've written many kind of poems for the thesis, probably over 100, but there's about 60 that are going to be going into the thesis, and these are kind of like the first half, if you like. So they're part of this much kind of larger network of poems. And in terms of kind of the subject or object of the poems, I really do think that there's kind of endless possibilities. There are countless objects in the world, objects that we don't even think about encountering on an ordinary day. And I think for me, I'm really interested in trying to translate onto the page how we encounter those objects and why we encounter them that way. And it's certainly something that kind of I'm like preoccupied with in my PhD too. With the study of kind of brain plasticity and how we remember and interact with objects in that way. So yeah, that's really where I'm at the minute, but certainly in the future, I mean, who knows? I mean, what I'm most excited about in poetry is the ability to experiment, to kind of do many different things. And I'm one of those writers where I don't like to be bored with the forms that I'm using, and I like to kind of have that freedom to play around with the text. So certainly the possibilities are endless there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, thanks, Lauren. I'm sure there'll be more questions. I'll have a look at the Q&A in a second, but I have a question for Martin, or possibly a couple. So Martin, you spent 10 years living and working in China. And, you translated from Chinese poetry. And I just wondered what you thought the effect of that was on your own poetry, if any.
Yeah, well, when I went to China, it was initially to teach English as a foreign language, which I did for the first 2 or 3 years. And I think having to do that, which kind of takes you back to the basics of the language, you have to kind of explain some of the things that you've taken for granted for 50 years, So I think to some degree, it definitely just made me kind of aware of, just more aware of the language and sometimes trying to be a bit more simple, But yeah, that experience certainly made me think about, well, what do these even just tiny words actually do and mean, I don't know if it was any more than that. I did try to learn Chinese, which was very painful. But I suppose just having to kind of burrow into the way words work even more than I would have done normally was perhaps part of that process. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And it's such a different language to English in terms of the fact that it's so visual. You know, that's
Yeah, well, to Chinese, you have to think completely differently, which is why I found it almost impossible, apart from actually saying the bloody words, you know. But yeah, just dealing with language in that way, and as I say, teaching the English and having sometimes to explain why you use something, which, well, actually, I don't know why we use that. Why do we use that? You know, which must have some kind of knock-on effect, I think.
Sure. Well, we've got questions now from the attendees. In fact, there's one in the chat, and there are some in the Q&A. So we'll have a question in the chat from Sandra Tappinen. Hi, Sandra. So you can, I guess you can see that. Everyone can see it. So when your work strays over into comedy, then back to pathos, do you have to rein it in, or do you just let it have its way with you? If you see what I mean. So much joy in Moby-Dick surprised me.
Who's that to?
That's to you.
Oh, was it? I think kind of humor. Humor is, well, you know, some people think that if you're funny, you're not serious, which is obviously complete rubbish. I don't know. I honestly don't know. Was part of the question, do I have to rein it in? Wouldn't rein it in. But having said that, maybe I don't mean that. Maybe you do sometimes. I do enjoy writing. I mean, I only write when I'm in a good mood. I'm not a writer who can write when I'm down or low or depressed. So I write when I'm in a good mood, which rather leads me sometimes to, you know, I want to kind of enjoy myself and also be interesting and entertaining. So yeah, it is something which, and I think in the last year or two, I've kind of written more funny stuff. The prose particularly, there are two prose pieces in this book. One that I read a bit from, and the other one which is called From the Education of an Idiot. And I mean, I just really enjoyed writing those, and I think they're funny, and they still make me laugh.
Yeah, and I think that comes across to the reader as well, very much so.
Yeah, and I don't rein that in. I mean, well, I had to rein some of, I didn't read any of it tonight, The Education of an Idiot. I didn't rein any of the humour in, but I reined in some of the obscenity and took it out. Because I thought I overstepped the mark, you know. So
we have other questions in the actual question and answer. So let me go through them from the bottom first. So there's a question for you, Lauren, from Sue Dimmick. Hi, Sue. She says, I'm interested, Lauren, that you see your poems as being a network. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess what I'm interested in doing with the poems is kind of showing how particular phrases or images or snippets of text work across the different poems. So throughout the collection, there'll be a sense that perhaps you've read something before and it might make you flip back to a different poem. And really, for me, it's about the idea of creating little habits or kind of plastic moments in the text where the text really does speak back to itself and beyond. And yeah, that's something that I love playing around with and will definitely continue to do so.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. The next question was, well, you can you see him, I guess, from David Belvin. Thanks both for great readings. Lauren, have you ever come across an object you found it impossible to write about? And Martin, why the hyphen in between the words Moby and Dick? So Lauren, you want to take that one first? Ever come across something you couldn't write about?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think I'm one of those writers where if I didn't force myself to write, I probably would never write anything. So every poem that you see here has begun as a free writing exercise. And I write every poem in a block of prose and then I kind of chisel away. So some stay in the prose block, some have lines. And I kind of I think about, is anything interesting happening in this bit of free writing or not? And obviously sometimes, a lot of the time, nothing interesting is happening, and that kind of goes in a pile of drafts, never to see the light of day, or maybe in the future perhaps. But in terms of an object that I've not been able to write about, I feel like I always have something to say, but I'm usually attracted to objects that are kind of somehow weird or creepy or horrific. I don't know what that says about me, but there you go.
Okay, thank you, Lauren. That's great. Martin, the hyphen.
Well, if you look on the cover of my Penguin edition of Moby-Dick is hyphenated, and at the beginning of that volume, there is a facsimile of the title page of what I guess is the first edition, and Moby-Dick is hyphenated. But curiously, in the book, there was a chapter called Moby-Dick where it's not hyphenated, and it's not hyphenated anywhere in the text. So the answer to the question is, I like hyphens, so I used it.
Good
but
question.
it is on the cover, so you have to ask Melville whether it should have a hyphen, really, I guess.
Yeah, I do remember the discussion about that hyphen.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about hyphens, you know.
We have another question now from Paul Sutton. Hi, Paul. So, hi, Martin. Don't you love the funny parts of Moby-Dick? There's one about a description of a total becalming, and some poor sort of a sailor plummets from the rigging into the ocean.
Yeah, actually, the first time I read Moby-Dick, which was I don't know when that was, but I can remember speaking about it to a friend in the USA, and I said, I think sometimes it's really funny, and he said, seriously, funny? Where? You know, I mean, just when he at the beginning when Ishmael is at the Spouter Inn and he has to sleep with, I mean, come on, there's funny in it. Yeah, absolutely, no question. Sorry, I'm pouring wine.
Go ahead. We have one more question, and I think that's from Stephen Collishaw, I think. Martin, 2020, why Moby-Dick? You may have answered that already, but feel free to enlarge.
Well, when I wrote the poem, which is now 4 years ago, give or take, it was one of those instances where the title came into my head. For some reason, and titles do that sometimes, I just had this title come into my head. And then shortly afterwards, I could see where I could go with the title. And I have no other explanation, because that's how poems happen sometimes with me. You know, they just pop up. So, you know.
Okay, thank you.
But I do love the novel. I mean, it's one of my favorite books. So, and I just love being in there, you know.
Okay, thank you, Martin. Thanks, Lauren. We don't seem to have any more questions in the Q&A box. We don't have any more in the chat. Last call for any questions before we wrap things up. We'll check. Ian Seed. Sorry, I missed this one. Right at the bottom. Ian Seed. Hi, Ian. Says, Martin, what do you do when you're sad and you don't write?
It's a bottle of wine here, but you know, it's I just sit around being miserable, Ian. You know, what else? You know, but I seriously can't write from depression and misery. I just can't. So just don't, I guess. You know.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sorry, I don't have anything more eloquent to say. I just don't.
All right. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Lauren. Thank you all for your questions or what we've got here. Yeah, you can see in the chat there are various comments. Maria Stadniczka. Hi, Maria. So thank you for a wonderful reading, Lauren and Martin. Thanks for organising this event. You're very welcome. It's good that we can, one advantage of these virtual events is that you can get together with people, so to speak, who you wouldn't normally be able to do. We have people from far afield here, and it's really great to be able to share an event like this with them. So I think we're all done, really. Tiller Brading, sorry, has you got a question? Oh yeah, there's more. Sorry, I'm missing these questions. Aled Williams says, Lauren, I love Mina Loy, but Stein is hard work. Which poems do you recommend to begin with?
I mean, personally, for me, it's anything from Tender Buttons. I mean, all about, you know, the object section. That's really my jam. And I think for me, almost the best poetry makes you work for it. And I just think, yeah, keep reading it, keep putting in the work, and maybe read some of Stein's criticism as well. And that kind of really does illuminate her poetics. So yeah, just keep at it. And yeah, Mina Loy is excellent, and I wish more people had heard of her and could appreciate her excellent work.
Yeah, and also the biography of Alice B. Toklas is also a good place to read, very accessible in terms of Stein's writing. We have Tiller. Hi Tiller, long time no see. Have you tried putting your poems into a plagiarism website? If so, what happens? I don't know who that question is for.
No, why would I? Well, I did plagiarize Herman Melville, and actually there's quite a lot in this book where I've taken text from other places, but I've never plagiarized anybody, so why would I? You know.
It was a question for you, Martin, actually, rather than Lauren. So she.
Yeah, I know.
Obviously, you're more prone to that kind of thing. You know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a lot of certainly in this book, I've taken a lot of text from other places, which is not the same as plagiarism, of course.
So I'm getting the hang now of this Q&A box, and I realise that
well done.
The most recent one's at the bottom, so I'm finding some more. Sorry, everyone. So we have a question from my sister-in-law, Margie Skinner. Hi, Margie. So the question is for Lauren. So it's, regarding the poem House and Houses, I loved it. Felt I could almost smell the house and houses. When you are writing, do you find one particular sense sometimes takes over and leads the writing?
That's a really interesting question. I think I consciously try and make sure that I'm representing all of the senses through the poems, because I think that when we encounter an object, we encounter it with all of our senses. Granted, one might kind of take over if something smells particularly horrific or indeed looks particularly horrific. But I do make a conscious effort to try and replicate the whole being of the object, certainly.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. We have a question from Adrian. Oh, hang on a second. Paul Sutton. Who is your favourite serial killer, Martin?
Yeah, well, I do know Paul Sutton.
I think that's all you need to say in answer to that question.
Yeah, I know Paul Sutton. So,
hi, Paul.
Hello, Paul.
Appreciate your question. I have a question from, no, I've lost it now. One second. Adrian Buckner. Question for you. Hang on, I'll take Rory's first. It appears to be first on the list. Question for Lauren. Have you thought about going back to poem objects? Some of your MA poems are excellent in that way, as are these new ones. What has made you return more concentratedly to poems on the page, or have you not? So I assume from that question you used to do concrete poetry, visual poetry. Is that right, Lauren?
Yeah, well, I think on the MA, I did this collection that was in a box, and you could pick out the poems in any order that you pleased. And one of them was kind of a box of confetti with bits of a poem stuck to it. And the hours that took to glue, honestly, I think it's traumatized me. So yeah, I'd very much like to return to that sort of thing in the future. And I think in the kind of wider scope of these poems, I do kind of play around with that a little more. Like I've got one about a mug that I half thought about printing on the inside of a mug, because it's about the kind of stains that get left behind in old objects like that. But yeah, it's something that I'm certainly interested in, and it's something that I do definitely want to explore in the future in terms of the materiality of a text, of a poem or an object.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. I didn't know that you'd done that kind of work, so that's quite interesting for me. I have a question from our friend Adrian Buckner. Hi, Adrian. Question for you, Martin. Without wanting to put you on the shelf, do you have any plans or fantasies about a collected or a new and selected to keep your options open?
No. It doesn't occur to me really. I mean, I've been doing this for 40 odd years and I just can't get my head around that. So, and who would publish that? I mean, and who would buy it? Oh, no. Thanks, Adrian. Maybe, you know, maybe talk to your friend Alan Baker.
Well, one thing's for sure, it would be a very large volume.
It probably would, and I'm good luck to anybody who could try to find all of it, because I don't have all of it. So, yeah, beyond me. But not a very saleable product, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, I think, oh, we've got another one. No, that's it. I think that's it. Let me just double check. I think that's everything. So, okay, I think we're all done. So there's some very good questions there. Thank you, everyone who submitted questions. And I think we're ready to wrap things up. I think it just remains for me and everyone, all the attendees, to say thank you to Martin and Lauren for those terrific readings. A virtual round of applause, please. I just also want to announce that this event has been recorded and will be available on YouTube at some future date, not in the not too distant future, so you can really relive it all again. So anyway, I think we're all ready to wrap up. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending, and thank you, Martin and Lauren, for the poetry.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for hosting as well, Alan. You're a brilliant chair.
Very welcome.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'll just allow everybody to leave peacefully, and I'll share my PowerPoint slide again.